Hey, Tom, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Hey everyone, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining us at this AMA on getting started with Codecov and Sentry. Sorry for being muted earlier, but just to reiterate, I'm Tom. I'm a developer advocate here at Sentry and Codecov, and just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about how you can get started using Codecov and Sentry. So what we're going to do is we'll do some introductions. I have a few people from the Codecov and Sentry teams to kind of walk us through what is code coverage, why you should care about it. We'll do a quick demo and obviously open up for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please get them ready. We are so excited to help answer them for you. So first off, we'll do some introductions. I'll just pull people up so they can introduce themselves. First up.
Hi, I'm Eli Hooten, the Director of Engineering at Codecov. Pre-acquisition of Codecov by Sentry, I was the CTO at Codecov. So yeah, happy to talk about Codecov and Sentry today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eli. As I mentioned before, I'm Tom, developer advocate at Codecov. Really excited to be here. Up next, we have Snigdha.
Hey everyone, I'm Snigdha. I'm an engineer on the issues team at Sentry. Excited to answer all your questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Snigdha. And finally, last but not least, we have Dhrumil.
Hi everyone, I'm Dhrumil. I am a product manager at Sentry and I worked on building this Codecov integration. So excited to answer any questions.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Dhrumil. With that, we're going to move on to a little bit about code coverage. So I don't know if everyone here has used code coverage or knows what it's like, but code coverage is a really simple concept. It's basically a measure of how much of your code base is actually tested versus how much of your code base isn't tested at all. Now, what we're looking at right now is just a pretty simple class in Python. It's a calculator class and it has 4 functions: add, subtract, multiply, divide. And what you're looking at specifically are these green lines and these red lines. And now if you're using a product like Codecov, that will show you which lines are covered, which means which lines are actually tested, versus which lines aren't being tested at all. Now, in this particular slide, you see that line 14 is in red, and that tells me that, oh, I haven't written a test for this return cannot divide by 0. And what that probably tells me is that, oh, I should probably go and write a test to make sure that that line actually runs and behaves the way that I expect it to behave. What you can also get from code coverage is this final percentage number. And you see that percentage number at the top right corner, that's 90.91%. What that tells me is over my entire code base, how many lines of code are actually covered by tests. And so that's a pretty nice metric to use to kind of understand, oh, have I actually tested my code, or am I just hoping that it's going to work when I deploy it to production? And so we kind of move over then to why does this actually matter to you as a developer? So there's 3 really big reasons why you might want to use code coverage. The first one is pretty obvious. It's because code coverage is just a measure of whether or not you are testing your code. This is just a good way to kind of look back and say, oh, we've actually tested our code versus no, we haven't done it at all. The second one is a little more nuanced, and it's that it really helps reduce the time that you use to write critical fixes. And so what that sort of means is that if you're able to find a bug before it hits production, then you're able to, you don't have to spend that time after it hits production finding where the bug is and trying to fix it. And the way code coverage works is that it at least helps to point out that you haven't tested a particular line of code that may be critical to your product. And the third thing is it, as kind of ties up to the last 2 things, is that really helps to de-risk your code changes. It helps you to find bugs early. It helps you to make sure that you have some standard of quality to your code before it hits production. So with that, we're going to shift over. I'm going to pull up Snigdha, and we'll talk a little bit about the integration and how this sort of works with Sentry.
Thanks, Tom. So if I'm looking at Sentry, if I see an error before the integration, let's talk through what it would look like to actually figure it out, to debug that error. I would go to Sentry, I would look at that error line, something like what you see in the top little confused person picture. And then I would have to navigate to Codecov separately to see if I have test coverage, to see if there's something there that I could do to figure it out. With the integration, what we've done is, if you look at the picture on the right half of the screen, everything that you need to debug is all in one place. So you start off, you go to Sentry, you find your error, and then you've got the stack trace link with the error line that's highlighted in black. And right there, you can see the link to GitHub. So you can see your source code. You can look at the code both in the stack trace and Sentry's UI and in GitHub if you want to see Blame or any of the features that GitHub has to offer. You also have the coverage overlaid right on top of the stack trace. And so I can immediately see if there is coverage, partial coverage, if my test isn't, or if my line isn't covered. And more importantly, I can see if I have test coverage for the error line, because that probably means that that test sucks. And that's something I'd want to fix immediately. You also have the added benefit, once you've set up GitHub and Codecov integrations, to take advantage of some of the other things that Sentry has to offer here. One of the big ones being suspect commits. So if you've set up your source code integration, Sentry will show you which commits are relevant to your file, which people have touched the file last, and you can start looking into those as a kickoff point for your debugging. The whole idea here is that we've streamlined that process. So once you are looking at an error, you don't have to navigate to a bunch of different places. You have all the tools in your tool belt right in one place. I'll pass it off to Dhrumil.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ram and Snigdha. So anyone who's using Sentry today already knows that you can search for new issues that occur in your latest release or in the last 7 days and how many users are being impacted by your errors. And that's already possible with Sentry. So you exactly know when you look at a Sentry issue, you can now see whether it's covered or uncovered, and you know where you need to actually add test coverage for. The point being is that, hey, when you see a new issue in Sentry, you see it's uncovered. If you write a test for it, if you write a good test for it, it's highly likely you're going to be able to prevent regressions in the future. And that's exactly what Sentry and Codecov brings together for you folks. But yeah, handing it back to Tom.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dhrumil. So we just talked a lot about this Codecov and the Sentry integration, but I think what would be really powerful is to see what it looks like. So I'm going to switch over to some code and we'll take a look and sort of see how this all fits together. Now, the first thing we have here is I have a pretty simple repository. And it's really similar to what we saw before with the calculator and the 4 functions. But it's a little bit different, and let's kind of take a look now. So our backend is stored under this API folder. I can click it, and I can go under calculator and calculator.py. And as I mentioned, again, it's a pretty simple calculator. It has 4 functions: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Now, unlike in the case that we saw earlier in this AMA, we're not actually checking the divide by 0 case. And you can kind of see where this is going to go, right? Like we're going to get some divide by 0 error, and we're going to try to see what this would look like in Sentry and with Codecov. Now, I kind of also want to show you the test as well, so we kind of see what is being tested and how that relates to code coverage. So I'm going to go back a folder and go under test calculator. And what you'll see here is that we have 3 kind of like test suites, right? We're testing the add function, we're testing the subtract function, and we're also testing the divide function. We're testing the multiply function. What we're not testing is the divide function, and we'll see why this is important later on. Okay, now I also want to show what this looks like in Codecov. And so I can go to the Codecov UI, I can click back into those same files, and we'll see calculator.py. It's like, great, we aren't testing that line 12. And we know this is true because, of course, we only have those 3 tests, right? We're only testing the add function, the subtract function, and the multiply function. Okay, so I'm going to go into the application. So I have this running locally. And I'm going to do some pretty basic math, right? So let's see if this works, right? 8 minus 2, we should expect 6. I'm like, great, we got 6. Let's do 9 times 5, and that should be 45. Great. So our calculator, we'd feel really good about this, throwing this up and having users use this. But now what happens if I do divide by 0? So if I could do 9 divided by 0, oh no, we have an error. What do we do about this? So in this case, what we would expect is something on the back end is getting this divide by 0, and we would expect a error to come up in Sentry. So I'm going to go to Sentry, and I already have this up, and obviously because we've been doing this a little before. But if I refresh, I should expect maybe the error to have repopulated or to have come back up. And I guess it hasn't yet. Sometimes these things take time. But what I do see is that Sentry makes it really easy for me to figure out where my error is. And so I see that's right here in line 12, just as we expect. We're not covering that divide by zero case. And of course, it gives me the error name too, zero division error, which is really, really useful. Now, what I also see is this Codecov overlay on top. And how I see that is, of course, on line 12, I see this red box. And if I hover over it, it says that it's uncovered. And so as a developer, what this tells me is that, oh, at some point, this line was written, and so whoever wrote it didn't write a test on top of that. And so now what I could do is I could go into GitHub, right? I could open up this line. If you could use, whatever IDE that you want. You could edit the file, and I could say, oh, great, like maybe I should protect against the divide by zero case. And I could say, oh, if y equals 0, then return maybe like cannot divide by 0, right? And we could save this and we could deploy it, and that would be fine. But let's say instead of doing this, we take it from the other side, right? And so I might be here and I might say, oh, I haven't tested this out. Maybe I should just write a test for it. And I could I could come back here and I could say, oh, great, let me edit this test underscore calculator. And let's say my solution is to just write a test divide, assert calculator dot divide 1, 2 equals 0.5. Now, in this particular scenario, I know that I'm testing the divide case, right? Like I've written a test for it. I know I'm doing it. But we also know that it won't fix the divide by zero issue. And so if I make this change, and I only make this change so I don't do the if y equals 0, then how this would affect things on the Sentry side is that I would see instead of being a red box, this would be a green box. And so what this tells me, instead of saying, oh, I just haven't written a test for this, so I need to go and write a test for it. If it's already covered, it means that my test is probably not sufficient enough. And I need to write a better edge case for this in order to catch this particular error. And so by having this overlay on top of your Sentry errors, it gives you a little more information about not only, oh, I haven't tested my code, but maybe my code or the tests I have my code aren't good enough. And so this really is just a way to get higher quality code to help you moving faster and getting your product in front of your users as quickly and as possible. So that's a little bit about how the integration between Codecov and Sentry works. And I hope that was really interesting and useful because we're going to move on over now to a little bit about the pricing. So I'm going to pull up Eli.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So kind of to help commemorate the launch of this feature, we've also launched alongside of it a bundle pricing plan for Sentry. So if you are a Sentry customer today, you can get 50% off our Codecov Pro plan. It's $29 a month for 5 Codecov Pro seats. It's normally $60 a month or $50 annual. This is available to Sentry Team, Business, and Enterprise plans. So whatever paid Sentry plan you're on, you can come use this. And it can be redeemed by current and new Sentry or Codecov customers. So if you're a Codecov customer interested in Sentry, you can sign up for Sentry and claim this benefit. If you're a Sentry customer interested in Codecov, you can sign up and claim this benefit. Or if you're net new to both and just think they might be nice to use together, same rules apply. So yeah, we're excited about this benefit, excited about this new feature, and hope you all really get a lot out of both. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Eli. Great. So with that, we're going to move over to the Q&A section of this AMA. I'm going to pull everyone back. And yeah, we'll start answering some questions. All right, let's see what we got here. What is a transaction versus a trace? I think this might be something that the Sentry folks can answer.
Snigdha, do you want to take that one?
Oh, you're both muted.
Dhrumil, go ahead.
So what a trace spans multiple transactions is what I've understood so far in Sentry. It's definitely more related to the performance monitoring side of things. And we have an excellent blog that I'll just share in the chat so that Tom can share about this with you guys folks too. but that's how we look at it. A trace connects multiple transactions that occur as your request goes from all the way to the front end to the back end. So that's how Sentry allows you to actually connect your different transactions. So you can see an issue is occurring in this part of a transaction in your entire trace. And let me just share that blog link with you folks too.
I realized that was also from a previous question that was asked, so sorry for that little curveball there, y'all. But we can pull up a new question now. Okay. Can I unite my two dev accounts with Sentry and Codecov?
Yeah, I'll take this one. The short answer is coming soon. This is something we're currently working on and specking out. So one of the first things we talked about when Sentry and Codecov joined forces was how to have like a single unified user account to sort of unite the two services. And so that's something we're currently working on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eli. What is the cost of getting this for my mobile apps developers who are interested in using it? And I guess, is this going to be different from the pricing that you talked a little bit about earlier, Eli? I suspect the answer is probably it's going to be the same if you're a Sentry or Codecov user. I think that's right, yeah?
Yeah, I don't see any distinction between mobile or web or any other platform. And, if you're using Sentry or Codecov, the bundle rules apply.
We also had a question about some best practices. I can kind of take the Codecov side of this, and if there are any interesting Sentry things, I would love to hear that too. But at least for code coverage, in terms of best practices, I think the reality of code coverage, and we do talk about this a lot, we have blog posts about it, but a lot of the questions that we get is, what sort of value should I aim for? Should I get 100% code coverage? Is that enough? Or, what should my goal sort of be? And, having done this for a lot of years, what we've sort of noticed is that around 80% is kind of the sweet spot. We have maybe only about 13% of our users hit that 100% code coverage standard, but closer to the 65% will hit somewhere around 80%. And that's just because over time, they've started to develop a better practice within their organizations to build this sort of testing culture and to build up to a pretty reasonable code coverage value. But more than just that, what we think is particularly important is that, sure, you could aim for 80%, but what you should really be focusing on is not just, hey, let's just get our entire code base to 80%, but focus on the parts of the code base that are really important to you, right? So maybe you have some authentication flows, or maybe you have some payments microservices. Those things are probably going to be a little bit more important to you than maybe an avatar changing feature, which, to be fair, would probably be really cool, and maybe you want that to work really well. But maybe the pricing thing or whatever your application is like. And so with Codecov, there are a few ways that you can kind of do that. You can split your code coverage based on directories, or you can figure out which uploads, maybe your unit tests are more important than your integration tests, or the other way around. But as far as best practices, kind of the most important thing is to consider your own code base, see what's most important in it, and cover those parts. Because that's really what's going to move you forward and have that, proverbial diamond of a code base. I don't know if there are interesting things on the Sentry side. But if not, that's also
I love
cool.
what you said about focusing on specific parts of your code base that are important. I think that even within Sentry code, that probably holds true, that the most crucial pieces of our system have better tests. In order for the integration to really excel, I think that it would be great if you have a little bit more time put in, kind of what Tom was walking us through earlier, to set up the GitHub integration, set up your source maps, your code mappings. Things like that will really help strengthen what Sentry has to offer.
Awesome. Okay. So let's see. We have a question about how to learn how to use these two products together in the most effective way. So of course, we did this AMA and we sort of talked about the integration. We have a blog post about that as well on like how to get started using it. As far as the Codecov side of things go, we have a lot of docs on how to get started using it. We have a lot of pieces in our blog post also, which kind of not only tell you more about code coverage and how to use that in Codecov, but also take for example, we have a post on how to do branch coverage, which is something that isn't always talked about. Everything we sort of looked at so far, and sorry, this might be a little bit of a tangent. Everything we looked at so far was around something called line coverage, right? We're seeing is this particular line run in your test suite? Is this particular line run in your test suite? But there's also other kinds of coverage too. And so there's branch coverage, which would be really important to you, or functional coverage, or class coverage. There are all these different aspects to coverage that may be important to you as well. And to kind of talk about branch coverage and why that might be interesting is if if we have that. You saw earlier that slide on, let me check if y equals 0, make sure that I'm covering I have like a return cannot divide by 0 line. But branch coverage would say, hey, I see this if statement. So this if statement could be true or it could be false. I want to make sure that you're testing both sides of it. So it could be really easy to get in a scenario where you're saying, oh, I've already covered this. Like I ran a test and it does the if case, and now the rest of my code, should work as expected. But that might not necessarily be true if you're not looking at the other side of an if statement. This is also true with like switching case statements. Like, are you testing all the cases? Or if you have a particularly complex Boolean logic in your if statement, have you tested all the possibilities of whether or not that entire thing could be true or false? That's kind of what I would say in terms of like learning a little bit more about Codecov and code coverage in general. Is like we do have a lot of pieces that kind of help to describe how you can be using it better. And I believe that probably is true for the Sentry side as well. There's probably a bunch of blog posts there. I don't know any off the top of my head, but if any of you would like to kind of talk about that a little, that's fine too.
Yep, I'll at least take a few of those ones. So I think Tom made a very good point that you will have some flows that you really care about. It could be a checkout flow or a login flow. As a developer, you probably know your code base best, so you know what functions you really care about. And Sentry can actually search for issues that are happening in a particular stack function or a file name. And that exactly tells you, okay, if you have issues in your main functions that you really care about and they're impacting users, those are the ones that you really want to fix and ensure that regressions don't happen for. So when you go and look at that issue, you can see whether it's actually covered or not covered. If you don't see any coverage information, then that means that something's wrong in how you're uploading the test coverage reports, or there isn't the latest test coverage report there for that function yet. But when you have that data, that really tells you, okay, I really should be fixing these issues, and I need to invest some effort in ensuring that these issues don't happen again and come back as regressions. And Sentry Search allows you to actually find the things that you really care about, which errors do you really want to fix. And with the code cover information, that just adds value, like to tell you that, hey, should I be investing in writing a test for this right now so that I don't have a regression in a very important area of my app?
Yeah. So I really liked how we were talking about like Codecov and Sentry and how we have this sort of integration going on together. What I'd really kind of like to know is, and I actually would like to know this personally, is where do we kind of go from here, right? We have this integration, we have the overlay of code coverage on top of your code base, and we see that in Sentry side. Are there any plans on like a V2 of that sort of feature, or anything that might be interesting to a user of either Codecov or Sentry, or both, or neither?
I can take a little bit on this. So it's funny that you mentioned V2. What users see right now for the Sentry Codecov integration is actually a V2. So we've already made quite a few improvements about how we are getting the latest coverage, whether that means walking back and looking at some of the more recent coverage reports, making sure that what we're surfacing is more relevant to the error at the time that it occurred instead of the latest coverage, since that can differ. For the future, I think that there's a lot of scope here. We are always ideating, open to suggestions, but there's no shortage of what we can do. A great place to think about coverage, or where I think of Codecov organically, is on a PR. So something that we have been exploring a little bit is what we could do with Sentry and Codecov together on a PR, what sort of insights we can surface, and what information would be helpful, so that you can really make sure that your coverage is robust and you're avoiding errors before you even check that code in.
Yeah, I love that. I obviously don't know what a future state might look like, but I feel like when we talk about Codecov, when we talk about the benefit to the user, we are always in this place of like, what can we do that is closest to the developer, right? Like, what's right in the workflow. And so, as being part of Codecov, we always say, great, like we have this PR comment, which will sort of show you, oh, like how will my coverage change based on this code change. And we also show you, we have these status checks, which also say, hey, if you don't meet some like level of code coverage, then don't let this code change be able to be merged into the code base. But I think what could be interesting, right, is like Sentry is so well aware of the errors that are happening in production, and being able to maybe flag, oh, like this piece of code or this file that you're changing, or this line, whatever it happens to be, is also like tied to a particular error. And having that sort of like information and making it easier for a developer to like know the impact of their code before they actually deploy it is like invaluable. And not only, of course, like before you deploy, but even after you deploy, and kind of like what we've been talking about with this integration, about being able to see, are you actually testing your code? Or here's an error, did you actually test your code in order to get there? So yeah, really, really exciting stuff. And I look forward to sort of seeing what that will look like. I also kind of, we did the demo a little bit earlier, but I didn't really get a chance to talk about if there are any like requirements for this whole Sentry and Codecov integration side. And so I think Dhrumil, a little bit more about like those requirements and if there's any like interesting setup that's needed.
Yep. So we do have some comments today. The Codecov Sentry integration would work only if you're using the GitHub integration with Sentry too. So we don't have the support for GitLab and Bitbucket today. So you would need to install the GitHub integration for Sentry. You need to ensure that you have your code mapping set up. And a very easy way to figure that out is that if you see the open this line in GitHub in the Sentry issues, you're good. Your setup's already done. And then we can identify common Sentry Codecov customers, and we automatically enable the integration for them. Or you can go to your organization settings and just toggle it on or off based on what you prefer. But these are the main steps. So once you have the GitHub integration for Sentry installed, it's a very easy one-click toggle for you to actually start using this. And obviously, we expect that you're using Codecov and have test coverage uploaded on Codecov. That's a given, but that's all that you need from the Sentry side then.
Yeah, I was going to say, as we were, talking about this AMA and how we were going to show off the Codecov Sentry integration, I have not really been a good Sentry employee, and I haven't used Sentry before. And so I was, trying this out, and obviously I've been using Codecov for a really long time, but it was so easy to get set up. I created a Sentry account. I clicked a few buttons and got my GitHub integration installed, and my code coverage was there. So it was really kind of amazing as a user to sort of get that early delight of like, oh, it just kind of works. And anywhere that I kind of had questions of like, oh, I'm not sure what's next, Sentry is really good about showing these little messages that be like, oh, like maybe you need to do this. And so that was really, really pleasant as a user. I don't know who necessarily worked on that, but I really did enjoy that. And it really helped me get to the end state that I was looking for as a user. So I think, I don't know if we have any other questions for the team here. If not, we can kind of talk about how you can learn more. Is there anything else that anybody would like to talk about in particular, besides, of course, like user integration and see what it's like? Great. Okay, so let's sort of go back here. If you do want to learn more about code coverage or this workshop, you can. We'll put the links up in a banner. So of course, like the blog on on code coverage, or if you want to do a workshop on performance, that's there as well. And you can check out our blogs on both the Codecov and the Sentry side to get a little bit more information about the integration and how to go about using it. If you enjoy this AMA and you want to know a little bit more, or if you just want to give some feedback about whatever it ends up being, please of course fill out the survey link. We'd love to hear from you and just get some feedback on how we're doing, what we can be doing better, or just to pop in and say hi. But yeah, if there's no other further questions, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you for being with us. We of course really appreciate you being here and asking the questions that you do. Always feel free to reach out. And thank you so much.